In this video, I want to go over two XLR to USB adapters. The first one is the Senal XU-2496, and the other one being the popular Shure MVX2U. Both of these adapters are capable of supplying 48-volt phantom power. They both also support a bit depth of 16 and 24 bits. There are some notable differences, starting with the gain range. The Senal topping out at 37 dB, while the Shure tops out at 60 dB. The length of the Senal is 6 inches, with a width of 1.3 inches. The Shure is far more compact, coming in at 3.35 inches long and 1.1 inches wide. Another considerable difference is the weight. The Senal coming in at 8 ounces over the 3.5 ounces of the Shure. Believe me, you really do notice a difference. Both adapters have a headphone jack on the bottom and a USB C power port. Now I'm going to pause here and talk about the USB C ports. Not all USB C ports are made the same. So the Shure comes with a USB-C to USB-C cable. This works as expected. The Senal came with a much longer USB-C to USB-A cable. Now, as you expect, you could use just about any USB-C to USB-A cable. I've tried out several dozen of my own and they all worked. However, and I wasn't the only one, what I could not get to work was USB-C to USB-C. I'm not joking. I tried every single one in my possession and none of them worked. Even a reviewer on B&H said he had the exact same experience. Now I emailed Senal and I asked him if there was a recommended cable, which they did respond with a recommendation. They also responded saying any cable should work, so I kindly responded with more information informing them of my experience. So the interesting thing is, what does work if you want to plug this into like your Mac, which is USB-C only? I had to get just a regular USB-C to USB-A adapter. This has worked on every device that I've tried. I'll leave links in the description of the exact components that I'm using. I did notice, though, that when I tried to plug in this adapter to the Senal and plug the USB-C end into my MacBook or any device, that did not work either. So I don't know what they did when they engineered this, but for some odd reason, this is not working with any USB-C to USB-C cable. And I have pretty modern USB-C cables that can support up to like 8K for video transmission. So it's not like I'm using really old and outdated cables. Quite possibly, I might be using too new of USB-C cables. This is definitely a really odd characteristic, and I don't know, I wouldn't say a glitch, right? This product does work. I just find it odd that I could not use it with USB-C to USB-C. Another critique about the Senal is that the XLR is not very snug. You see, I can kind of wiggle this shotgun mic around. There is a lot of play here. It may be tempting to attach the microphone right to it and hold on to it, but I've noticed that this just moves way too much, and I honestly wouldn't trust it. I think this would probably mess up your recording. If you want to handhold an adapter, like so, I would recommend probably the Shure. My experience with the microphones that I've tested is that this is far more snug than the Senal. I do really like the physical knobs of the Senal. I'm just traditional like that, opposed to the Shure, which has no controls on it whatsoever. It actually has a lot of features, but all the features you actually edit through a desktop app. So you plug in the USB-C into your computer on either Windows or Mac, and use an app to change the gain. There's even EQ. I think there's a limiter. There's like a generic compressor. So it actually has a lot of features. However, you can't really edit them on the go, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're heading out and you need to keep things compact and light, and you're only using one microphone and you know the settings that you want, There's really nothing wrong with the Shure. Now, probably the one critique I have about both of these adapters is the lack of mounting options, specifically the 1/4-inch thread that we're used to on pretty much about everything these days. Now, to be fair, the Shure is pretty lightweight, and the XLR jack here is pretty snug. You could just plug this right in your microphone and you'd be fine. However, as I point out with Senal, it is heavier, and the XLR jack is, well, it's kind of loose, and you wouldn't want this hanging out the back of your microphone, to be completely honest. What they did provide, though, is these little Velcro straps that slide through the back like so, and you could just wrap them around the leg of a tripod or a light stand. Now, one difference I haven't mentioned yet is the price. The Shure comes in at around $130 US, and the Senal comes in at around $80 US, at least at the time of making this video. That's a pretty big price difference. Now, the other difference, sound quality. Is there a big difference between the sound quality, the characteristics of each adapter? So I'm going to go through several mics that I have here in my studio and test them out, starting with the Shure SM7dB. On this first test with the SM7dB, I've set the gain to louder, tone natural, mic position near. I'm just going to use auto level. Now I put the Shure SM7dB into bypass mode, which means I'm not using any of the internal gain features of this microphone. Let's get started. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. I'm going to set up Audacity to pick up the Senal. All right, now I've got the Shure SM7dB plugged in the Senal, and I've set the gain to max. Let's get started. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. The next microphone in this test will be the Sennheiser MKH 416. For this microphone, I've brought the gain down on the Senal to approximately, looks to be about 35%. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. All right, now I'm switching the XLR cable over to the Shure adapter. When it comes to this microphone, I like to take the gain of the Shure down to normal, at least when I'm this close. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. The last microphone I'm going to test with is going to be the Lewitt LCT 540S. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. You know, as I swap the XLR cable one last time for this final test, it is so painfully obvious how much more snug the port is, or the jack on the Shure over the Senal. There is a huge difference. Huge difference. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Interesting. So let's start with the Shure SM7dB. So if you don't know, this mic, which is the second version of the very popular Shure SM7B, has built-in gain. I chose not to use the built-in gain for this test because I want to rely specifically on the gain of each of the adapters. Now, I think the Shure did a better job mostly because this, remember, can go up to 60 dB of gain. The Senal is only 37 dB. I don't think it has enough power to manage these dynamic microphones on its own. So if you had a Shure SM7B, which needs additional gain, external gain, I would not recommend Senal. You would want to go with the Shure. If you were using a Shure SM7dB, I think you would want to turn on the preamp and probably go with plus 18, in my opinion. Now, when it came to the MKH 416 and the Lewitt 540S, I prefer the Senal. I just like the low ends of my voice. I felt on the Shure, it was a bit nasally, to be honest. So I personally lean towards Senal. If I was doing a traveling podcast, driving around, and I wasn't using the Shure microphones, I was using my condenser microphones, I think I'd go with the Senal, just because I like the sound that comes out of it before I take it into post. However, if I was like an influencer on TikTok, Instagram, just doing shorts, I'd probably lean towards the Shure. It is really compact. I gotta give it to them. It's all about personal preference. I do like the physical knobs, honestly. But if you're going out and you're only carrying one microphone, you're probably not going to have to be adjusting these settings all the time. So that's where I see the appeal of the Shure. I think both of these adapters have their use cases for the right person. I will say the USB C issue with the Senal and the not so snug XLR port is kind of a turnoff. If it wasn't for the sound quality, I would have gotten rid of this, to be honest. But I think it does sound pretty good. Well, that's my opinions. I'm sure yours will differ, and that's perfectly fine. I have to keep reminding people it's okay to have different opinions. For some reason, that doesn't sink in with everyone. Well, that's all I have for this video. If you found this information useful, well, you don't have to smash the like button or subscribe. I leave links in the descriptions to nonprofits that you can donate to instead. I would appreciate that a lot more. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.